4 disturbing Thanksgiving horror stories. Welcome to DTC, Dark Timeless Creeps, where we explore the eerie and unsettling side of the world. This Thanksgiving, we bring you 4 chilling stories that will make you rethink everything about the holiday. What starts as a time for family and feasts quickly turns into a nightmare when dark forces come into play. From haunted gatherings to twisted traditions, these terrifying tales will leave you questioning what truly lurks in the shadows of the holiday season. Prepare yourself for 4 disturbing Thanksgiving horror stories that are far from the comforting warmth of home. Stay tuned if you dare. Story 1: The Man in the Woods. A disturbing Thanksgiving horror story. Spending Thanksgiving at my cousin Matt's farm had always been a tradition in our family. The sprawling land, complete with a massive barn, a pond that looked like glass, and a tree line that stretched beyond sight, was a welcome escape from the hustle and bustle of city life. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful in hindsight. This year was no different. The house was filled with the familiar sounds of laughter, clinking silverware, and children's excited footsteps as they raced across the hardwood floors. Matt's 5-year-old son, Ben, was at the center of it all, his plastic dinosaur in hand and a smile that seemed to light up the whole room. Outside, the other kids were playing tag, their high-pitched shrieks carrying on the cold November air. Everything felt perfect until it didn't. It started with a simple question: "Where's Ben?" Matt's wife, Lillian, had gone outside to call the kids in for pie. She came back into the house and mentioned that Ben wasn't with the others. At first, no one thought much of it. Kids wander off, right? "He's probably in the barn," Matt said, dismissing the worry. "He loves it in there." But when we checked the barn, it was empty. The horses were grazing peacefully, and there was no sign of Ben. Next, we checked the house, calling his name, but there was no sign of him hiding under any of the furniture. The unease began to settle in. "Did anyone see him go toward the woods?" I asked, my gaze drawn to the tree line that loomed in the distance. Matt's face tightened. "He knows not to go past the fence," he said firmly, but there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes. "Kids don't always listen," I said, trying to stay calm. "Let's check the woods." We spread out along the edge of the property, shouting Ben's name with increasing urgency. As a firefighter, I had learned to keep a level head in situations like this. I scanned the ground for tracks, looked for movement in the bushes, and tried to think like a 5-year-old. Where would I go if I were Ben? 15 minutes passed. We were getting further from the house, and the chill in the air grew heavier. That's when we heard Lillian's voice, a scream, sharp and panicked. "I see him!" she yelled. We turned toward her, our hearts lifting in relief, but that relief quickly turned to dread. Lillian was standing near the far edge of the property, pointing at the tree line. Ben was standing there motionless. He was near the edge of the woods, but he wasn't alone. A man stood beside him, tall and gaunt, dressed in dark, tattered clothing. His hand rested on Ben's shoulder in an almost friendly way, like they were old friends. My blood ran cold. I didn't think. I just sprinted. "Ben!" Matt yelled, his voice filled with terror. He dashed toward his son. The man jerked his head up, startled by Matt's shout. Without warning, he yanked his hand away from Ben's shoulder and bolted into the woods. I was already running after him. The thick underbrush slowed me down, but the man was fast, too fast. I caught glimpses of him darting through the trees, his figure disappearing into the shadows just out of reach. My heart pounded harder, adrenaline flooding my system as I pushed myself to run faster, but then, just like that, he was gone. The forest fell silent. I stopped, panting, scanning the woods. No movement. Just the sound of my breath and the distant calls of my family. I turned back, feeling the weight of the situation settle on my chest. When I returned to the clearing, Lillian had Ben in her arms, holding him tight as if he might disappear at any moment. Tears streamed down her face, her body trembling with fear. Matt was on the phone with the police, his voice tight with frustration. "What happened?" I asked, kneeling beside Ben. He looked up at me with wide, innocent eyes. "The man said he had a surprise for me," Ben said softly, his voice almost dreamlike. "He wanted to show me something in the woods." A chill ran down my spine. The way he said it, so casually, was unsettling. The man hadn't seemed threatening to Ben, not at first. "Did he hurt you?" I asked gently, trying to suppress the growing panic in my chest. Ben shook his head. "No, he was nice, but when you all started yelling, he got scared." Lillian's arms tightened around Ben as she glanced nervously at the woods. "Why would he be in the woods with our son? Why didn't you tell us where he was?" She spoke to Matt, her voice trembling with fear. The police arrived about half an hour later, sweeping through the woods with flashlights and search dogs. They scoured the area but found nothing. No footprints, no signs of the man. The officer who spoke with us seemed genuinely concerned. "Do you know him?" he asked, his brow furrowed in confusion. "No," Matt said, shaking his head. "I've never seen him before." "He didn't seem like a local," Lillian added, her voice full of dread. "But who knows? He could have been watching us for days." The officers speculated it might have been a drifter, someone passing through. But that explanation didn't sit well with me. There was something off about it. This man hadn't wandered onto the property by accident. He knew exactly where Ben would be. The next morning, Matt and I couldn't shake the sense of unease that had settled deep in our bones. We decided to search the property ourselves, driven by a mix of anger and a need for answers. We combed every inch of the woods, starting near the tree line where we'd found Ben. As we ventured deeper, I began to notice something strange. Truck tire tracks, faint but discernible in the soft earth. They weren't fresh, but they had been pressed into the ground enough to stand out. "What's this?" I asked, pointing to the tracks. Matt crouched down and ran his fingers along the grooves. "Looks like someone's been parking here," he said, his voice low. "For a while." The tire tracks crisscrossed, overlapping in several places. The truck had been parked in the same spot repeatedly, possibly for days. Nearby, we found an empty soda can and a cigarette butt, both seemingly left behind recently. "This guy wasn't just passing through," Matt said, his voice hardening. "He's been watching us." I couldn't believe it. The idea that someone had been on the property for days, maybe even longer, waiting for the perfect moment, made my stomach twist. How many times had Ben run around outside, so carefree, completely unaware that someone had been lurking just beyond the trees? We gathered what little evidence we had and called the police again. When they arrived, one of the officers looked especially concerned as he examined the site. "He's been camping out here," the officer said, his voice grim. "This wasn't random. He was watching your family." Hearing those words confirmed what I already feared. This wasn't just some random encounter. This man had been planning something. He knew exactly when to strike, and what better time than when our guard was down, surrounded by family and laughter. The officers promised to increase patrols and assured us they'd be on the lookout for any suspicious activity, but it didn't offer much comfort. Thanksgiving would never feel the same to me again. What should have been a day of gratitude turned into one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. Every time I see Ben laughing and running around with that innocent smile, I think about how close we came to losing him. The image of that man standing by the trees, his hand on Ben's shoulder, will haunt me forever. And the thought that he had been sitting in the woods, watching, waiting, knowing exactly when to strike, chills me to my core. The woods will always be a little darker now, and every Thanksgiving I can't help but wonder, what if he's still out there, watching? Do you dare to listen to the dark? If tonight's tale gave you chills, let us know your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear what creeps you out and what other stories you'd love us to explore. Don't miss out on the next terrifying story. Subscribe to DTC, Dark Timeless Creeps, and join the family that thrives on the unknown. Tap the notification bell so you're the first to hear every spine-chilling tale. Share this video with someone brave enough to face the darkness, and let's dive deeper into the creeps that haunt our world. Comment below and become part of the terror. The darkness is calling, and we want you with Story 2, Disturbing Thanksgiving. Horror story, The Man at the Door. Thanksgiving has always been my favorite holiday. There's something magical about it, the way everyone gathers around the table, the laughter, the old stories being retold, and the smell of food filling the house. For me, it wasn't just about the turkey or pumpkin pie. It was about the tradition, the togetherness, the feeling of home. This year, I was hosting. For the first time in years, I had both sides of the family under one roof, and I wanted everything to be perfect. The house was bustling with activity. My husband Dave was in the kitchen, carefully slicing vegetables, and the kids were scattered around, their voices bouncing off the walls as they played board games in the living room. The air was thick with the scent of roasting turkey and cinnamon from the pie cooling on the counter. As the evening wore on, everything felt just right. The warm chatter, the crackling sound of the fire, the contentment in everyone's voices. It was exactly what Thanksgiving should feel like. We sat down for dinner, laughter filling the room as we dug into the feast. But then, just as I was beginning to relax, there was a sudden knock at the door. It was loud, sharp, and so unexpected that it cut through the warmth of the room, sending a wave of confusion through all of us. We exchanged puzzled glances. No one was expecting anyone else. "I'll get it," I said, trying to shake off the feeling of unease creeping up my spine. I stood up and made my way to the door, convinced it was just some unexpected guest or delivery. When I opened it, I was faced with a man I didn't recognize. He was in his late 40s, wearing a worn jacket that looked like it had seen better days. His eyes were sunken, his expression tired, and there was something about his demeanor that made my stomach churn. He stood there, shifting on his feet, hands shoved into his pockets. "Sorry to bother you," he said, his voice flat and almost rehearsed. "My car broke down up the road. Could I use your phone to call for help?" There was something about the way he spoke, something off. It wasn't his words, those were harmless enough, but the tone was strange, almost as though he had said the same thing to a dozen other people before me. Something about him felt wrong. His eyes never quite met mine, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't telling the truth. "I'm sorry," I replied, my voice polite but firm. "We don't let strangers inside." "There's a gas station about a mile back. You should be able to get help there." He stared at me for a long, uncomfortable moment. His gaze was piercing, his face expressionless. "I don't need to come in," he said after a pause, his voice taking on a slightly different tone. "Just let me use your phone." I hesitated, feeling a cold shiver crawl up my spine. I shook my head again, my grip tightening on the door handle. "I'm sorry, I can't let you in. Please, try the gas station." With that, I quickly shut the door and locked it, my pulse quickening as I leaned against it. The sudden weight of the situation sank in, and I found myself unable to shake the feeling that something was terribly off. Dave came up behind me, raising an eyebrow. "Who was that?" "Some guy," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. "He said his car broke down. I told him to try the gas station." We returned to the dinner table, but my mind kept drifting back to the man at the door. Something about him didn't sit right with me, but I pushed the thought aside. The evening carried on, everyone laughing, the kids playing, the food devoured, but I couldn't fully shake the unease building in the pit of my stomach. We were sitting in the living room enjoying coffee and pie when it happened again. The knock, louder this time. A rhythmic, steady knock that echoed through the room like a warning. My heart skipped a beat. I stood up, irritation rising now. "Who is it?" I called through the door, my voice shaking slightly. The voice that came through this time was softer, more urgent. "Please, I really need to use your phone. My wife is sick in the car. I need help." I felt a chill run down my spine. His words felt rehearsed, as though he'd practiced them. The sudden desperation in his voice seemed forced, almost too polished. It was as if he knew exactly what to say to make someone feel guilty, to make them let their guard down. But I couldn't. Something felt wrong. I glanced toward the window, and that's when I saw it. A shadow moved just outside my peripheral vision. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it made my heart skip a beat. My breath caught in my throat as I slowly backed away from the door. Before I could turn to Dave, the door handle began to twist, slowly, methodically. It was an agonizingly slow motion, like he was savoring the moment, toying with us. I rushed forward and locked the door again, my pulse racing in my ears. My mind was scrambling. "That's it," I said, my voice trembling. "We need to call the cops, now." Dave didn't hesitate. He reached for the phone, but as his hand touched the receiver, a third knock came. It wasn't just a knock now. It was a soft, rhythmic scratching sound, as if someone was dragging something sharp across the door. I could feel my body go numb, my hands trembling. What the hell was going on? "Call the cops," I said again, my voice barely a whisper now. "Call them, Dave." But before Dave could pick up the phone, the knocking stopped. Dead silence. I stood there frozen, my mind racing. I wanted to scream, but no words came. The house felt smaller somehow, the walls closing in on me. I could hear nothing but the pounding of my own heart, echoing in my ears. I turned to Dave, but he didn't meet my gaze. He was staring at the door, his face pale, his eyes wide with something I couldn't quite place. Then came the sound of footsteps, soft and measured, moving along the wooden floor just outside. Someone was walking around the house. My stomach lurched. Who was it? And what did they want? I rushed to the window, peeking through the blinds, but there was nothing, no one, only the creeping darkness of the night. I stepped back, my chest tightening as I realized that whatever was outside, whatever was tormenting us, hadn't gone away. And then, just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, the door shook violently. The force behind it was powerful, like someone had slammed their body into it. The sound rattled the entire house, making the windows tremble. My heart leapt into my throat as I backed away from the door. I don't know what happened after that. My memory of the night is blurry. All I remember is the panic, the fear, and the strange sense of inevitability that settled over me. That knock, that man, the sound of scratching and shuffling around the house, it all felt so surreal, like a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. When the police arrived, they found nothing. No trace of the man, no sign of anyone. It was as if he had never been there at all. They assumed it was some prankster or a homeless person trying to get attention, but deep down, I knew it was something more, something darker. If you ever hear a knock at your door this Thanksgiving, don't open it, because sometimes the ones who knock are already inside your head, and they don't always leave. Do you dare to listen to the dark? If tonight's tale gave you chills, let us know your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear what creeps you out and what other stories you'd love us to explore. Don't miss out on the next terrifying story. Subscribe to DTC Dark Timeless Creeps and join the family that thrives on the unknown. Tap the notification bell so you're the first to hear every spine-chilling tale. Share this video with someone brave enough to face the darkness, and let's dive deeper into the creeps that haunt our world. Comment below and become part of the terror. The darkness is calling, and we want you with us. Story 3: The Watcher in the Shadows. Thanksgiving night had fallen, casting a long, eerie chill over the house. The crisp air outside was a stark contrast to the warmth that enveloped us inside. My wife, Emily, and I had spent the day hosting our extended family, cooking, laughing, and passing around plates filled with turkey, mashed potatoes, and pumpkin pie. By the time the evening had arrived, we were all exhausted. The house was filled with that post-feast serenity, the kind that only comes after a day of togetherness. Our children were sprawled on the couch, half watching a movie, half drifting into sleep from the heaviness of their bellies. The fire crackled gently in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across the room. It was peaceful, it was calm, but that calm would be shattered and nothing would ever feel the same again. It started with a feeling, a strange, creeping unease that slowly wrapped itself around my chest. At first, I tried to dismiss it. I was just tired, I told myself. Maybe I had overdone it with the wine. But the feeling wouldn't go away. It sat in my stomach, heavy and gnawing, a sense of being watched, though I couldn't say why or by whom. I tried to ignore it, but then Emily spoke. Her voice, usually so steady, now trembled with something I couldn't place. "Did you hear that?" I froze. The house was eerily quiet now, save for the occasional crack of the fire. My eyes instinctively darted toward the windows. The blinds were drawn, and everything outside was obscured by the darkness of the night. It was impossible for anyone to be peeking in. "What did you hear?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "It was like a tapping sound, soft but distinct," Emily said, her gaze meeting mine. "It sounded like someone knocking on the window." I stood up abruptly, a chill running down my spine. The kids remained oblivious, their half-lidded eyes struggling to stay awake. My heart began to pound faster, but I told myself it was just the wine, or perhaps an animal outside. There was no need to panic. I approached the window slowly, pulling the curtain aside just a little. My breath caught in my throat as my eyes scanned the yard. At first, all I could see was the driveway, bathed in the soft glow of the street lamps. The trees were dark silhouettes against the night sky. And then, just as I was about to turn away, I saw it. A figure. A man stood at the far edge of the yard, partially hidden behind the thick trunk of the old oak tree in our front yard. His face was lost in shadow, but his shape was unmistakable. He stood unnervingly still, as though he had been waiting for something, or someone. My heart hammered in my chest. "Emily," I whispered, my voice low and shaky. "There's someone outside." I quickly grabbed my phone, dialing 911, my hands trembling as I pressed the numbers. "There's a man outside our house," I told the operator, trying to keep the fear from seeping into my voice. "Please send someone immediately." The operator assured me help was on the way. Meanwhile, I kept my gaze fixed on the figure in the yard. He hadn't moved, not an inch. I stepped back from the window, telling Emily to keep the kids inside and lock all the doors. The terror I felt was growing with each passing second, but the figure remained, unmoving, as though he could see us inside the house. It was a moment of pure dread. The minutes stretched out like hours before the police finally arrived. I ran to the door to let them in, my eyes never leaving the window. But by the time they reached the yard, the man had vanished. The yard was empty, silent. The dark shapes of the trees swayed gently in the wind, but there was no sign of the intruder, no footprints, no disturbance in the grass, nothing. I stepped outside with one of the officers, searching the perimeter of the house. There was no trace of anyone having been there, no signs of forced entry. The police suggested it was probably a prank, maybe some teenagers trying to spook us on a holiday night. But I couldn't shake the feeling. My skin crawled as I glanced around, trying to make sense of it. How could someone stand so still, so close without making a sound? And why had he disappeared so quickly? That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the shadow of that figure standing in the yard, unmoving, watching us. My thoughts kept racing, replaying the moment again and again, but there was no explanation, no logical reason for what had happened. But what bothered me the most wasn't just the man's sudden appearance, it was the feeling, that deep, primal sense of being watched, of being hunted, that lingered long after the police left, long after the figure had disappeared. It was as if something had been watching us for far longer than we knew, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal itself. For days after the incident, I found myself checking the windows, peering out into the darkness, even in the middle of the day. I couldn't shake the sensation. It was like the man had never really left. I would be in the kitchen preparing a meal, and suddenly I'd feel it. Those eyes on me again, the same chill running up my spine. I told myself it was just my imagination, but deep down, I knew better. I knew something had changed. Then, one evening, a few weeks after that night, I was sitting in the living room when Emily came to me, pale-faced. She'd found something that made my blood run cold. On the window ledge in the kitchen, hidden behind the curtain, was a single piece of paper. It was folded neatly, but I hadn't seen it before. Emily unfolded it slowly, and the words were simple but chilling. "I'm still watching." The room grew colder as I read the note. My mind raced, desperately trying to find an explanation, but there was none. I checked the entire house. All the windows were locked, all the doors secured. And yet, the note was there. I don't know how he got inside. I don't know how long he had been in our home, watching us, but I know now he never really left. And every time I close my eyes at night, I feel the presence of someone standing just out of sight, waiting, watching. Every Thanksgiving since that night, the feeling returns. Each year, I find myself checking the windows, peering into the darkness, half expecting to see that same figure standing there, just out of reach. The memory of that man in the shadows haunts me. It's as if he's waiting for something, waiting for me to slip up, to be caught off guard. And I know deep down I'm not safe. He's still out there, he's still watching. Do you dare to listen to the dark? If tonight's tale gave you chills, let us know your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear what creeps you out and what other stories you'd love us to explore. Don't miss out on the next terrifying story. Subscribe to DTC, Dark Timeless Creeps, and join the family that thrives on the unknown. Tap the notification bell so you're the first to hear every spine-chilling tale. Share this video with someone brave enough to face the darkness, and let's dive deeper into the creeps that haunt our world. Comment below and become part of the terror. The darkness is calling, and we want you with us. Story 4. The Forgotten Visitor, a disturbing Thanksgiving horror story. Thanksgiving had always been my favorite time of year, a time for family, food, and gratitude. But this year, something was wrong. Something was deeply wrong. It all started when Sarah and I moved into that charming farmhouse in the quiet countryside. It was the kind of house you'd find in a Hallmark movie, cozy, quaint, and full of rustic charm. A creaky old house with wooden floors that groaned underfoot, thick curtains that blocked out the cold, and a massive stone fireplace that seemed to radiate warmth from the very core of the house. It felt like the perfect place to start our new chapter. We decided to host Thanksgiving dinner at the farmhouse, thinking it would be a great way to meet our new neighbors and show off our cozy home. We decked the house out in full holiday decor. A giant golden turkey sat at the center of the dining table, surrounded by pies cooling on the counter, and candles flickered softly on the mantelpiece, casting a warm glow across the room. The scent of cinnamon, roasted chestnuts, and the rich aroma of turkey filled the air. Our children, Emma and Luke, were bouncing with excitement at the thought of having everyone over for the first time. The evening went smoothly at first. Our neighbors, the Millers, arrived with their 3 kids, and the house was filled with laughter and cheerful chatter. Everyone seemed to be having a wonderful time. There was no sign that anything could possibly go wrong. It was everything we had hoped for, until the night began to wind down and the atmosphere started to shift. As the evening drew to a close and the guests began to leave, I was clearing the table, lost in thought, when Sarah came over to me. Her face was pale, a nervous tension in her posture. "Did you see who's sitting on the porch?" she asked, her voice quivering. I frowned. "What are you talking about? There's no one outside." She hesitated for a moment, glancing over her shoulder as if to make sure no one was listening. "I swear, I saw someone sitting on the porch when I was putting the dishes away. I thought it was one of the neighbors, but when I looked again, they were gone, just vanished. A chill ran down my spine, my stomach tightening with unease. I had just passed by the front door moments before, and I would have seen anyone on the porch. But when I went to check, the porch was empty. There was no one there. The yard, the swing, the garden, all were still, untouched by the faintest trace of human presence. It could have been a trick of the mind, fatigue playing games with us, but the uneasy feeling lingered. Still, I shrugged it off, dismissing it as a moment of exhaustion. But the strange occurrences didn't stop. Over the next few hours, as we prepared for bed, I noticed something unsettling. Every time I walked past the windows, I thought I saw someone, standing at the edge of the porch, their figure hidden in the shadow. It wasn't much, just a fleeting glimpse, but the more I tried to ignore it, the more I was convinced something was watching us. And every time I checked, the porch was empty. I kept the curtains drawn, the windows locked, but every so often when I dared to glance out, I could have sworn there was a figure standing there, just out of sight. It was as if the house itself were holding its breath. That night, after we had gone to bed, I kept hearing noises, soft, barely audible knocks, like someone was tapping gently on the front door. I tried to convince myself it was the wind or the house settling, but the knocking kept happening, more insistent each time. I lay in bed, listening to the sound, my heart pounding in my chest, but I couldn't bring myself to get up and check. It felt like an intrusion, an invitation to open the door to something I wasn't ready to face. The next morning, I decided to investigate. I stepped outside, hoping to put my mind at ease. The air was cold and crisp, and the garden, with its frosty grass and silent trees, was just as it had been the night before. But then, near the porch swing, I saw it, a single black glove, lying alone on the swing. It hadn't been there the night before. My stomach turned. I crouched down to pick it up when Sarah's voice rang out from inside. "Did you find anything?" I held up the glove, my hand trembling as I showed it to her. "This wasn't here last night." We both stared at it, silent, the reality of the situation sinking in, but there was no answer, no explanation. We asked the Millers if they had seen anything unusual, but they all shook their heads. No one had seen anyone outside, and no one knew who the glove might belong to. It was as if the visitor had never been there at all, as if the entire event had never happened. But it hadn't stopped there. Over the following days, more strange occurrences unfolded. Late at night, the front door would creak open, though we were sure we had locked it. I'd find lights flickering for no apparent reason, casting long, eerie shadows across the walls. The knocking would return, soft at first, but louder as the days wore on, coming from the front door when no one was there. And the feeling of being watched, of being followed, never left. It gnawed at me like a persistent, invisible force. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end every time I walked through the house. It wasn't paranoia, it was something much worse. I knew someone was out there watching us. I felt it deep in my bones. One night, after a particularly intense knock at the door, I decided to confront whatever it was that had been haunting us. I grabbed a flashlight and ventured outside into the cold, the beam of light cutting through the darkness. The house loomed behind me like a silent sentinel, its windows dark and uninviting. The porch, however, was different. The swing was gently rocking, though there was no breeze. And there, at the edge of the yard, I saw it. The figure. A shadowy shape standing just beyond the edge of the porch. My heart raced as I approached, the flashlight trembling in my hand. But when I reached the spot, there was nothing. The figure had disappeared. I rushed back inside, locking the door behind me, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. There was no one out there, no sign of life. But the feeling, the suffocating, crawling sense of being watched, remained. And then came the final confirmation that we were not alone. One afternoon, as I was working in the study, I found something. A series of deep, jagged scratches on the inside of the front door. It wasn't the kind of thing a person would leave behind, and the marks were too fresh, too deliberate. It was as if whatever had been watching us had tried to get inside. That evening, we had a visitor, just as we had that Thanksgiving night. But this time, it wasn't a neighbor. This time, it was something far more sinister. I still don't know who or what came to visit that night. I don't know what it wanted or why it chose us. But the house has never been the same. Every time we have guests, I catch myself glancing at the porch, half expecting to see the forgotten visitor standing there waiting for me. I thought moving into this farmhouse would be the beginning of something peaceful, a fresh start. But now I can't shake the feeling that we've opened a door to something we can never close. Something that waits for the right moment to return. Something that never really left. As the darkness deepens and the stories grow more unsettling, we venture deeper into the unknown together. Each chilling tale brings us closer to the eerie truths lurking just beyond the veil of reality. The terror doesn't stop here, it only gets worse. Subscribe to DTC Dark Timeless Creeps now and stay on the edge of your seat. You won't want to miss what's lurking in the shadows next. Hit that notification bell and prepare for the next terrifying chapter. Remember, in the world of DTC, the creeps are always waiting, and they never rest.